The lake that was never meant to be sold. They say a man's home is his castle. Mine wasn't a castle, it was a valley, a lake, and a dam my great-grandfather built with his own hands. Long before real estate brochures and gated communities, our lake sat cradled between two arms of rolling hills, reflecting the sky like a mirror. In spring, geese would nest on its banks. In summer, the water was so clear you could see the pebbles at the bottom. And in autumn, the trees painted their fiery colors across its surface like a living canvas. But that was before the drought. Year after year, the rains grew weaker. The once mighty streams that fed the lake thinned to trickles. By the time my father passed the land down to me, the lake had turned into a cracked, sun-baked bed of mud and stubborn weeds. The dam still stood, but the heart of the valley was dry and quiet. People in town started calling it wasted space. That's when the HOA came. They didn't arrive with bulldozers. They arrived with suits, smiles, and promises. The Lakeview Estates, they called it. Glossy pamphlets showed mansions with shining windows, private docks, manicured lawns. They didn't see a dry lake bed. They saw prime real estate with scenic potential. I was invited to the presentation, of course. They wanted to partner with me. Their pitch was smooth. We'll bring life back to this land. Think of the value. Think of the beauty. We'll make it a community masterpiece. I told them the truth. This land floods. Always has. The lake isn't gone. She's sleeping. They laughed, politely, like I was some stubborn old fool clinging to the past. Within months, they'd bought out the neighboring plots. Some families held on, but many couldn't refuse the money. Overnight, signs went up. Coming soon, luxury homes starting at 1.5 million. Trucks rolled in, surveyors walked the valley, and engineers tapped at the soil with metal rods like they were listening for buried treasure. I watched from my porch as they drove stakes into the lake bed my grandfather had once sailed a rowboat across. Every thud into the earth echoed like a heartbeat I thought was long gone. They drained what little remained of the water into a bypass trench, filled the cracks with gravel, and paved roads over what used to be the shallow end. The HOA board held wine and cheese evenings in a temporary clubhouse, showing off digital mock-ups of future mansions. They called the central boulevard Lakefront Drive. The irony burned. As construction began, I noticed something they didn't. After a rare midsummer storm, puddles gathered in the lowest parts of the site. The ground drank slowly, reluctantly, as if it remembered the weight of water. I warned them again. You're building on memory. Lakes don't forget. Their project manager waved me off. Modern engineering, sir. We've got drainage systems, concrete piles, foundation reinforcements. This isn't the 1950s, maybe not. But the hills hadn't changed. The valley hadn't changed. And the sky? Well, the sky had a way of evening scores. By autumn, the first few mansions stood tall, steel, glass, and stone rising where cattails used to sway. Their lawns were neon green, thanks to underground sprinklers, their walls lined with expensive insulation. Realtors brought potential buyers in SUVs, talking about exclusive views and a community built on elegance. They didn't mention the cracks beneath. I still lived on the ridge, the only original house left. From there, I watched the sunset bleed across unfinished rooftops. The lakebed was gone, paved and parceled, but beneath the layers of concrete and ambition, I could feel it waiting. My grandfather used to say the land speaks if you listen. And that autumn, the silence was deafening. Steel, glass, and denial. By the next spring, the lakebed didn't look like a lake anymore. It looked like a suburb dressed up for a magazine cover. Wide boulevards curved elegantly through the valley, lined with freshly planted trees. Ornamental lampposts flickered on at dusk, casting golden halos over brand-new mansions. Some were ultra-modern, all sharp angles and glass, while others looked like Tuscan villas, complete with imported stone facades. A few homeowners had already moved in, their driveways crowded with SUVs and luxury sedans. The HOA called it Lakeview Estates Phase 1. I called it Denial, bored and paved. They celebrated each completed mansion like a trophy. Every time a new family moved in, The HOA board hosted a welcome gala in their temporary clubhouse. I was invited, but I never went. I had no desire to sip champagne and listen to people boast about wine cellars built where catfish once swam. Still, I couldn't ignore what was happening. From my porch on the ridge, I could see everything. The neat symmetry of cul-de-sacs, the shining windows, the manicured lawns. It was beautiful in a way. But beneath the perfection, I saw mistakes. One evening, curiosity got the better of me. I walked down to the construction zone where the second phase was underway. The ground was damp, not from rain but from seepage. Springs that had been buried decades ago were slowly bleeding back to the surface. Workers pumped water into ditches, but it was like trying to bail out a sinking ship with a spoon. I approached the site manager, a man in a bright yellow vest with a clipboard. "You've got underground water pushing back," I said. "That's not something you can just pump away." He gave me a rehearsed smile. "Sir, we've got subsurface drainage systems. French drains, sump pumps, everything's modern here. No worries, no worries." Those words stuck with me. That summer brought an unexpected heat wave. The valley baked. Cracks opened in the unfinished roads, and some lawns browned despite round-the-clock sprinklers. But the HOA didn't see warning signs. They saw opportunities. They doubled down on marketing. A glossy brochure landed in my mailbox. "Luxury living by the lake, where elegance meets nature." Nature. If only they understood what they were dealing with. In July, the local news started talking about an upcoming El Niño weather pattern. Meteorologists predicted an unusually wet autumn and winter, with heavier rains than the region had seen in decades. Farmers cheered. HOA executives shrugged. During one board meeting, which I attended only because they kept using my land for runoff, I brought it up. "This valley floods," I said, pointing to the historical rainfall charts I'd brought. "This isn't speculation. You're building on a lakebed. If those rains come, your drainage won't hold." The HOA president, a sleek man in his 40s with perfect hair, leaned back and smirked. "We appreciate your input," he said, his voice smooth like polished stone. "But our engineers have signed off on everything. We've invested millions. This is the safest development in the county." A few homeowners nodded, some with nervous glances, others with blind faith. I could almost hear the unspoken thought, "He's just the old guy on the hill. He doesn't get progress." But nature doesn't care about progress. By late summer, the homes were fully occupied. Kids rode their bikes on the sidewalks. Sprinklers hissed every morning. The HOA held movie nights on the central green, projecting family films onto a giant inflatable screen. People laughed, drank wine, and admired the reflection of sunset on their floor-to-ceiling windows. And then the first storm hit. It wasn't even a big one, just a summer squall. But for the first time I saw the system falter. Water pooled along Lakefront Drive, swirling around the expensive stone mailboxes. The runoff trenches filled quickly, sending water gushing toward the temporary drainage basin the HOA had built. It held barely, but it was a glimpse of what was coming. That night I stood by my window and watched the storm roll out. Lightning flashed across the hills, illuminating the valley below like a warning shot. The mansions looked vulnerable, their foundations too clean, their glass too thin. They didn't belong here, not the way the land remembered. After the storm, HOA contractors came in fast. They cleared debris, fixed pumps, reassured residents. "Everything's under control," they said. But the smell of wet earth lingered in the air, thick and ancient, like the valley itself was waking up from a long sleep. The meteorologists kept repeating their warnings. A series of strong Pacific storms expected this fall. Residents should prepare for potential flooding. The HOA board sent out a cheerful newsletter instead. Autumn at Lakeview Estates, cozy nights, community events, and exciting new construction in Phase 2. Steel, glass, denial, that was their foundation. When the sky finally opened, the first real storm came in late October. At first, it was just heavy rain, the kind that made you put on a jacket and hurry inside. The HOA posted cheerful reminders on their community app. "Don't forget to bring in patio furniture. Stay cozy! But the storm didn't pass. It grew. Thick, low clouds rolled over the valley like a siege army. The rain didn't fall in bursts. It poured in steady, endless sheets. By midnight, the hills above the lakebed were soaked through. Small rivulets turned into rushing channels, carving through soil that hadn't seen this much water in decades. From my porch on the ridge, I watched the valley turn dark. The lampposts flickered in the rain. The sound was constant, like the sky had opened a faucet and forgotten to turn it off. Down in Lakeview Estates, water began pooling faster than the pumps could clear it. The storm drains, designed for moderate seasonal rains, were choking. Mud, leaves, and construction debris clogged the grates. The streets turned into shallow rivers, swirling with brown water that reflected the blinking lights of alarm systems. At around 2 a.m., I heard the first distant sirens. Someone's basement had flooded. By 3 a.m., the HOA's emergency chat lit up like a Christmas tree. Screenshots of flooded living rooms, driveways submerged, backyard retaining walls crumbling. The HOA president sent out a message trying to calm everyone. Please remain inside your homes. Our systems are designed to handle this. Crews are working, but I could see the truth from where I stood. The lake wasn't filling, it was remembering. Rainwater coursed down the hillsides, converging exactly where it always had. The deepest part of the old lakebed. Decades of memory guided it, like invisible veins reopening. By dawn, Lakefront Drive was under 2 feet of water. Cars sat stranded with their hazard lights flashing weakly. Residents, still in their robes and slippers, stood on porches clutching coffee mugs and staring in disbelief. The luxury lakefront living they'd paid for was becoming literal, and this was just the beginning. Meteorologists called it the atmospheric river, a massive, unbroken band of storms sweeping in from the Pacific. More rain fell in that single week than the region had seen in some entire years. Day after day, the sky didn't clear. The soil, already saturated, had nowhere to send the water. The drainage basins filled to capacity, then overflowed. Pumps shorted out. HOA crews, untrained for real emergencies, tried to divert water with sandbags and temporary barriers. It was like trying to stop the tide with brooms. On the third night, I walked down to the valley edge to see it myself. The once silent lakebed was alive again, not with calm water, but with a chaotic, swirling mass. Streets disappeared under brown waves. Fences bobbed like driftwood. Decorative garden lights floated past like drowned stars. I saw one of the early homeowners, a young couple with a baby, wading through waist-high water trying to reach higher ground. I shouted for them to climb onto my old tractor parked nearby. Their faces were pale, their voices shaky. They'd never believed the stories about the floodplain. Now they were living inside them. Emergency services arrived, but the HOA's private gates and winding layout slowed them down. The community, once so proud of being exclusive, was suddenly isolated. Roads in and out became rivers. Power lines snapped in the wind. By midnight, the entire valley was dark. From my house on the ridge, I could see flashlights bobbing like fireflies as residents scrambled to salvage what they could. The glow of submerged streetlights cast an eerie light beneath the rising water, like looking down into the drowned past. I found myself whispering the same words my grandfather had once told me during a flood long ago. The lake always comes home. By the 4th day, local news helicopters hovered overhead. Their cameras showed the surreal image of million-dollar mansions sitting in a growing inland sea. Anchors used words like historic, unprecedented, and disaster. But for me, it wasn't unprecedented. It was inevitable. The HOA president finally went on camera, drenched and visibly shaken, trying to maintain control. We are working closely with local authorities. This was a once-in-a-century event. But his voice cracked when the camera panned to a row of luxury homes, their windows shattered by pressure, their polished floors buried under murky water. This wasn't a movie. This was the lake reclaiming what was hers, and deep down, a part of me felt a grim, heavy sense of "I told you so," not with pride, but with sorrow. Because warnings had been ignored, Not because they were unclear, but because people believed money and modernity could outsmart nature. The rain hadn't stopped yet, and the real damage hadn't even begun. The collapse. By the time the fourth storm rolled in, the valley wasn't a neighborhood anymore. It was a lake, a living, rising, unstoppable lake. The water that had started as shallow pools was now several feet deep in some areas. The once grand entrance sign to Lakeview Estates, with its stone pillars and elegant metalwork, was half submerged, the lights beneath the surface flickering like a warning beacon. The air smelled of wet soil, gasoline, and panic. On the fifth night, everything broke. The wind came first, hard, relentless gusts that screamed through the valley like a freight train. Trees bent until their branches snapped. Power lines whipped like angry serpents, sparks flashing against the black sky. The rain followed, heavier than ever, slamming down in sheets that blurred everything into a grey wall. From my house on the ridge, I could barely see the nearest mansion through the storm. But I heard it, the deep, gut-punching groan of something massive giving way. It started with the roads. The layer of asphalt laid over the old lakebed began to buckle and crack. The ground beneath had softened into sludge. Street after street split open, swallowing cars and ripping apart sidewalks. Decorative brick retaining walls collapsed like sandcastles. Expensive landscaping, fountains, stone pathways, flower beds, floated away like toys, and then the houses began to move. Mansions built on shallow slab foundations shifted under the pressure of rising groundwater. The soil that once supported them had turned to soup. Cracks snaked up their walls like jagged scars. Windows shattered under the stress. One house tilted visibly, its front porch dipping into the floodwater like the deck of a sinking ship. Another's garage door caved in with a loud metallic crunch. Screams echoed through the night as residents realized their homes, their dreams, were literally coming apart beneath their feet. Inside the valley, chaos reigned. HOA board members, who once strutted through ribbon cuttings in suits, now ran through knee-deep water in ponchos, their phones useless without power. Emergency services struggled to reach everyone. Some families had barricaded themselves on the second floors of their homes, waving flashlights from windows, hoping helicopters would spot them. Around midnight, one of the key drainage embankments at the far end of the valley finally failed. It wasn't a dramatic explosion. It was worse. A low rumble, a slow give, and then, like a giant exhaling, a section of earth slid away. Water surged in from the upstream creek, doubling the flow into the basin. In minutes, the calm pools turned into a violent current. I grabbed my flashlight and waded down the hill with my old truck, headlights cutting through the rain. A group of neighbors had already gathered near the ridge, those who'd fled early. Among them was the same couple I'd helped days before. They held their baby tight, faces streaked with rain and fear. Their mansion was gone. The water had reached the second floor. One man, who used to sneer at me during HOA meetings, was now shivering under a tarp, whispering, "I should have listened. God help me, I should have listened." We used tractors, old pickup trucks, even a broken utility trailer to pull people out. Some refused to leave, believing the water would stop. Others clutched photo albums, documents, anything they could grab before the flood claimed it. Around 2 a.m., the power grid in the entire valley failed. Total blackout. The only light came from flashlights, headlights, and the occasional flash of lightning. And in those bursts of light, I saw something that will stay with me forever. A row of luxury homes, the same ones featured in glossy brochures, standing in chest-deep water, their silhouettes cracked and sagging, like old ships taking on water. The lake had come back not peacefully, but with vengeance. The HOA president tried to make one last call for order through a battery-powered megaphone. His voice cracked under the roar of the storm. "Everyone, please stay calm." The wind ripped the rest away. Moments later, his own home, the largest mansion in Phase 1, was seen listing to the side, its foundation crumbling under the hydrostatic pressure. He vanished into the chaos, no longer the face of control. By dawn, the valley was unrecognizable. Roads were rivers. Lawns were lakes. Fences, furniture, and cars floated together in a surreal jumble. Dozens of families huddled on my property, the highest ground for miles, wrapped in blankets soaked to the bone, watching their investment dreams drown in silence. No one spoke for a long time. The storm had finally passed, but the sound of the water remained, steady, unstoppable, like the heartbeat of something ancient and patient. The collapse wasn't just physical, it was emotional. The illusion of control was shattered. The HOA's promises had washed away like topsoil in the rain, and the lake, she was home again. After the water, when the sun finally rose, it didn't bring hope. It brought silence. The storm had moved on overnight, leaving a heavy grey sky and an uncanny stillness. No birds sang, no children played. The only sound was the slow lap of water against broken walls. From my ridge, I looked down into what was once Lakeview Estates. What I saw wasn't a neighborhood anymore. It was a lake again, wide, brown and restless. The elegant curves of Lakefront Drive were gone, buried beneath several feet of standing water. Rooftops peeked out like islands. Some houses were tilted, others partially collapsed. Cars sat submerged up to their windshields. It looked less like a disaster zone and more like a drowned dream. Emergency helicopters hovered overhead, lowering baskets to retrieve those who had refused to leave the night before. Rescue boats navigated through cul-de-sacs that were now canals. News vans lined the nearest dry road. Reporters in raincoats spoke into microphones, their voices carried faintly up the hill. Unprecedented. Millions in damage. A planned community devastated. For me, it wasn't unprecedented. It was inevitable. Down below, families gathered whatever they could salvage: photo albums, pets, medicine, memories. One man stood ankle-deep in muddy water, staring at the cracked remains of his garage. He didn't move for a long time. Another woman sobbed as she watched her swimming pool overflow and mix with the flood. Her once immaculate backyard, now just part of the lake. The HOA board tried to set up a command center in a partially dry clubhouse. Their voices carried across the valley, still trying to sound authoritative. But their polished tone was gone. Gone were the cocktail parties, the sales pitches, the glossy brochures. All that remained was a row of exhausted people in wet clothes, trying to manage a disaster they were never prepared for. Within days, the blame game began. Residents filed lawsuits against the HOA, the construction companies, and even the county. The HOA blamed the unforeseen natural disaster. The developers blamed the engineers. The engineers blamed extraordinary weather. But the old flood maps told a simpler story. They'd built mansions on a lakebed, and the lake came home. Environmental agencies moved in fast. Teams with clipboards and fluorescent vests walked the flooded valley, taking water samples and measuring soil stability. One of them stood on what used to be a driveway and shook his head slowly. "This," he muttered, "was never supposed to be built on." Within weeks, the county declared parts of Lakeview Estates uninhabitable. Foundations were compromised. Roads were too damaged to repair quickly. Mold crept into the walls of homes that hadn't completely collapsed. Insurance companies hesitated, pointing to floodplain clauses buried deep in contracts. Payouts were slow. Some never came at all. For many homeowners, it was ruin. The dream they'd bought into, the dream sold to them with glossy images and empty assurances, had literally washed away. They weren't just facing financial loss. They were facing the weight of disbelief. They had built their lives on ground that was never meant to hold them. As for me, I opened my property to those who had nowhere else to go. Families camped on the ridge for weeks, living out of trucks and tents. We shared food, water, generators. People who once dismissed me now looked at me with quiet gratitude and sometimes shame. The HOA president eventually showed up at my door. He looked nothing like the polished man from the meetings. His suit was gone, replaced by muddy jeans and a wrinkled jacket. "You warned us," he said quietly. I didn't answer. He didn't expect me to. Over the following months, the lake didn't drain fully. It settled. As the county abandoned repair plans for the deepest parts, nature reclaimed the valley. Ducks returned. Reeds began to grow where front lawns used to be. Fish followed the streams back in. The HOA dissolved, unable to sustain itself after lawsuits and debt, and the lake lived again. The dam my great-grandfather built still stood at the far end, weathered but steadfast. The water filled back behind it naturally, like it had been waiting for this moment. It wasn't the crystal blue lake of my childhood, but it was alive, a real lake, not a marketing gimmick. Sometimes I walk down to the edge and stand where Lakefront Drive once was. Beneath the surface, you can still see the faint outlines of streetlights and rooftops, ghostly shapes beneath the water. A reminder of arrogance, denial, and nature's quiet patience. They built mansions on my lakebed. They ignored the land, ignored the warnings, ignored history, and when the sky opened, the lake didn't fight. She simply returned.